Hi, HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to episode 51 of HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today, we're joined by a special guest. We have James Cheng. James is the Global HR Director for Diversity Inclusion, BRG leader at Cargill. James, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. James, fill in the gaps. Tell our listeners a little bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
I would like to start with saying that coming from my history of my culture and background, I'm a first-generation American, Chinese, and that actually kind of started this whole trend that led to where I am today. Parents are from China and Hong Kong, and then from that environment, it created the foundation that leads into D&I work for me. As for my previous work, I've served 17 years with Best Buy prior to Cargill.
Oh, wow.
Yes, within that time frame, I went from retail management to corporate IT to D&I. And then in that whole entire 17 years, 13 of those years, I've served in BRG capacities. And also during that time, I actually joined the Air Force National Guard. So I served military at that time. And also on the side, I opened 2 separate restaurants that were very successful.
Wow. That's a lot.
And then now I work for Cargill.
Wow. Pretty amazing journey there. You've gone all over the place. I'm sure you've taken away different things from each of those journeys, right?
Exactly.
That's helped you where you are now. So D&I is obviously a topic which is coming up more and more now. I think over the last few years, it's sort of found its fame, let's say.
Yes.
But as you explained to me before our call, it's existed for a long, long time now. It's just not something really that's been spoken about enough. What does diversity and inclusion mean to you?
For me, diversity inclusion is the willingness to look beyond the unconscious and conscious bias and find ways to give all opportunities to succeed. So that brings in the 2 parts of diversity and then inclusion. They are very distinctively different, but they need to work together to succeed. So that would be kind of where I would go. And to quote something by Andreas Tapias, one of the foremost experts in the space, it's between the mix and then how to make the mix work, as they like to call it. So.
Yeah. So what is the role then of a diversity and inclusion leader?
Well, one of the biggest things for us is being able to be self-aware and understanding that all facets of HR needs to be able to be flexible. And that's where diversity and inclusion comes into place. We're kind of the R&D of HR, as I like to call it, because there's so much unknown explorations that have not been tapped into, and that's where D&I has the opportunity to influence not just HR but businesses and also overall culture. Because one of the big things that D&I has is that we're not limited to the corporation. We're not limited to just the HR space. Often than not, D&I practitioners are working with corporate affairs, community relations, government affairs, and as well as, of course, our businesses to make sure that they're succeeding. Because yes, we're representing the brand of the organization, but we're also teaching others to see value where value has never been seen before. And that's the difference.
So in your experience then, what are the benefits of having a diverse workforce?
One of the biggest things is innovation, the unique opportunities for innovation. Just because you have a team of people who are creative doesn't mean you're going to always get innovation out of it. More than often is that ideas comes from your people. And a lot of times from people in the front lines. They're the ones seeing things, and they're the ones who are all over the world that lives in a different life than you do. And that's where they bring in their diverse perspective that helps innovate. I use an example that I've had before, which is how one of our businesses back at Best Buy, for example, they were talking about how can we influence .com space? How are we going to look at a way to approach our populations differently? So one of the things is one of my business resource groups did was a project on related to bringing in cultural differences. So one of the groups, the Asian Alliance group or the Asian Business Resource Group, they ended up recommending a focus on specific techniques and marketing that were focused on specific holidays. For example, Lunar New Year, or AKA Chinese New Year, for example.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make sure that we approach that population and reach that base? Well, one, how do you advertise correctly? One thing that they learned very quickly from the .com space, you can't just throw up a bunch of items to sell and expect it to happen.
That's what they do.
Yeah, exactly. But they reaching out to the group ended up giving them guidance. For example, what color is important because it's related to their culture. What type of imagery is right that was going to attract customers for that. Another piece was timing. People don't realize they don't shop on the week or day of Lunar New Year's. They shop after, and they prep before. So timing is vital. So things of that nature is important. But unless you reach out to that diverse population, that specific group, you might never actually get those insights. And that's one of the ways that they were able to use that.
And it's crazy that businesses don't do stuff like that more often, because all of these people exist in their organizations. It's just taking the time to actually to reach out to them, and I'm sure as well that also really helps with engagement levels, that they're actually engaging with that particular set of individuals in the organization. Do you find that that's something that you find by engaging them and getting their feedback and including them in these types of activities? Does it increase the engagement?
Absolutely. And that's where the inclusion piece comes into play. The inclusivity is what makes it work, because the diversity is just the physical piece of it that's there, but until you use it, it's still useless. You can fill the population with nothing but minorities and diverse populations and so on and so forth. But the reality is, unless you know how to effectively lead them and actually get information and innovation from them, it's not going to be useful. And that's where that whole journey that you mentioned and we talked about is that D&I space has been here for over 30 years. It's been for many different companies. But no one has fully solved it because there's an expectation that is a silver bullet there that solves all of it, which is not true. It's a journey that keeps evolving in HR.
Yeah. Well, on that point then, how do you set the right expectations for the leadership team of, how do you measure success in D&I?
I would say first and foremost is making sure you understand where your leaders stand and them actually understanding where they are currently in the journey. Because most of the time, leaders expect they hire a D&I team to do the job, and themselves are just given the brief to say what they need to say and they move forward. But the reality, it isn't that way. The leader has to be involved. They have to have a personal stake in the work, and then setting that expectation that, number one, you're not an expert, and you are usually leading everything. So a lot of times leaders are expecting to be the forefront of all this work. But reality, being humble and being able to say that you are vulnerable, that you do not know everything in the space is vital. And that sets the initial expectation before we even talk about metrics. Because thing about metrics is, it is that proverbial silver bullet. People expect a metric to solve D&I, when in reality, it's only an indicator for D&I versus what actually needs to happen.
So what steps did you take then to do that? Is it, having one-on-ones with these leaders? Is it, what are some practical steps that people can take to engage the leaders and manage the expectations?
First and foremost, definitely the one-on-one piece, understanding, getting their story, meeting them where they are at. Because one of the biggest things is for leaders is that their story of what their perspective is their diversity too. So it's where they come from. You have to respect where they're from. And then from there, that's where you educate and show them, well, this is your portion of your diversity, but to be inclusive, you're going to have to learn about others. And that's one of the biggest pieces, is that initial getting them to the point where, oh, you're actually listening and caring about my diversity. Maybe I do need to care about other people's diversity, because that's where you build that stakeholder management piece. Because that's, sometimes I feel like that's a lost art nowadays, is it's that understanding that it's not about shaking hands and networking and then giving a quick email here and there. It is very much about understanding what makes a person tick, making sure you understand what drives them from a day-to-day, and whatever you're doing actually benefits them just as much as you're asking from them. And that doesn't matter whether you're an executive for the organization or you're frontline people.
Yeah.
So
Amazing. I think one of the things I was interested in asking you, there's so many companies that I'm seeing now or are, hiring managers of D&I, directors of D&I. They're sort of popping up all over the place. You only have to look on LinkedIn to see the amount of companies that are recruiting for someone in the D&I space. You're in high demand. What advice would you give to someone moving into that role? What advice would you give to companies that are hiring for that role? And what advice would you give to a person who's going to be in that role as a new leader in that space?
I would definitely recommend, if anything, be open and honest about where you stand. And that's part of being a D&I practitioner. Just because I'm a D&I practitioner does not mean I don't have bias. It does not mean I am perfect at this work by any means. It is about being aware that you have your biases and how to control it. And then from that, overcome your fear that just because you don't know something, you can't do it. Because in D&I space, again, there's no silver bullet. No one solved it yet. So we're all working in this ambiguous space. So if you're good with ambiguity and or need to learn to be good at
You got a
ambiguity,
choice.
then this will be a fun space for you from an HR perspective.
And then from a business perspective, they're looking what are things, in the first, say, 6 to 12 months that they should be focusing on. If this is a new department or function they're looking to build, what are the key sort of things that they need to be focusing on?
I would say first and foremost, adjust your time frame. 6 to 10.
I shouldn't have said that. Yeah.
No,
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
No, it's perfect. Actually, that actually would be one of the pieces I would definitely focus on, is understanding that 6 to 12 is not going to work. Be aware of that.
No time frame.
Exactly. It is very much
What are
about
the first steps then? What are the first steps that we should take then? Different question.
definitely figuring out where your awareness is, where you're at. And then from there, finding avenues that gives people the opportunity to come together. So that's why some organizations have employee resource groups, business resource groups, employee business networks, so on and so forth, is that they give their employee the opportunity to come together and voice ideas. And they're all from different areas. And then it's also about intersectionality. It's about bringing all those differences, and then even though they have their different groups and so on and so forth, you still want them to come together. And then from there, be open and honest and be authentic about themselves. And that's where that mix works for the business, because here's the thing, the business cares primarily about how do we solve the issue of growth, right? And what's one of the best way to grow is to innovate, to come up with new ideas and then try new things. And that's what diversity and inclusion brings. It brings all your best talent, which is all your diverse talents, to come together and create new ideas overall based on their experiences, what they've seen in their world. Because it just takes one person with one tiny little experience and idea that can become a multi-million-dollar venture. So that's where that comes into play.
Yeah, I don't think that's spoken about enough, the link between diversity and inclusion and innovation. It's not something that I've heard, every time I read an article, I do research, I never see that come up as a key driver, a business driver. Why do you think that is?
Because I will always say this, diversity and inclusion is not something that people easily understand or want to comprehend. Because again, we are creature of habit. We do like to stay within our comfort zone. And just like any business group, if you were to put a group of innovators in a room, if you send a structured business person into that room, they're usually going to be very, very apprehensive, because they're like, wow, these people act completely different, so on and so forth. D&I is no different. It's one of those situations when you come into the room, when you have a bunch of D&I people, and people who have that passion, is that they have completely different ideas, completely different views. And not everyone likes that difference all the time. Sometimes we like to stick next to the people that look and sound and think like us, because it's comfortable. And reality, diversity and inclusion isn't comfortable. It's about pushing the envelope.
Yeah. On that point then, I'm realizing more and more now that D&I means different things to different leaders, and everyone seems to have their own approach. And why is that? Why is there such a diverse approach to D&I? Is it because we haven't solved it? Is it because it's so new? Everyone that I seem to speak to has a different thought process or methodology, etc., in place.
I think you hit the point. It's not solved yet. it honestly isn't solved yet at all for any organization. There are certain ones that are a little bit more advanced, but there's pieces that they're not strong on too. But one of the biggest things that I've realized when it comes to diversity and inclusion is the space that it's just like in any innovation space, it's always going to change. It's always going to evolve with the time, just like generations. We see new things happen every single day per each generational group. That is no different for D&I. We go along with that trend because we have to match that trend, is that people change. And so does organizations. They need to change to survive.
Yeah. So on that point then, how do you make sure that you're adding value then to the business?
Always set a baseline. Understand where you are right now, and then figure out when it comes to what baseline and what is the next step for growth. So when we talk about metrics and measuring and how we know about success, is that we need to first see where the organization stands when it comes to whether it be representation, whether it be development growth, whether it be promotion rates, whatever it may be. We need to have a baseline of where we are, and then look at where does the real causes of challenges are from D&I. So for example, why is it harder for a female to get the same equal pay? Is it because that they have a challenge when it comes to the policies and how we offer to them? Or is it, do we need to teach our population to ask differently? Because there's a cultural difference when it comes to how certain genders approach certain things. So understanding that we teach leaders to think differently and say, hey, we've got to make sure we're approaching it correctly and set up safeguards, and that's where D&I comes in. We help create those safeguards. We help guide leaders through that time frame of understanding that, hey, you've got to understand the population you're approaching.
And are you guys harnessing technology then? Talking of metrics, are there any particular technologies or solutions that are helping you aid this process?
Yes.
Can you share what you guys are using within the organization?
I consider, at least from a BRG sense, we are working with a newer type platform, and tell you right now, this is a whole new industry. So
yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. It wasn't planned as a question, but in my mind, I was like, well, okay, how? Because I think HR itself is going on this journey already, this technology transformation. I'm just wondering how that's affecting D&I.
It is still affecting us just as differently as anyone else. For us, it's been a matter of what do we go after in measuring. But the one thing we've realized when it comes to D&I is when it comes to technology, it has to relay the story and connect people. So that's the big thing about technology for us, is connecting those people across the globe. So one of the platforms we're looking at that we've been working with is catered around business resource group connecting together. Cargill has over 100 different chapters global wide, with different business resource groups in different regions for different purposes. And one of the biggest challenges is having to make sure that we have a platform that all of them can come together, share their stories, share their ideas, and then also share their plans of what they're going to do about it. Yeah. And then from there, again, there's multiple companies that does this now, but again, that's a completely new industry when it comes to D&I or business resource group, employee resource group management system. So that is new.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was a sort of a key player at the moment that was leading the way. Is anyone out there that you could recommend, or is it so new that you wouldn't feel comfortable in doing so?
I would say is too new. I personally stepped into it with looking with a lot of people who wanted us to do beta testing for them. That's how new.
Imagine.
So yeah. It's literally at that point that it is such a new technology. They know certain metrics that they want to measure. For example, how does a group spend and how many participation and engagement is it affecting? Those measurements are there, but again, it's an indicator, not an actual solve. So that's what the new platforms are doing, and they're creating, is trying to find ways to measure things that, again, is different for different organizations.
And are you collaborating with the wider HR team? Collaborating with how to use, maybe tap into some of the insights that they can provide?
Absolutely. So for my work specifically, each of my BRGs are actually tagged to one of the businesses or one of the functions for that matter within HR. So for example, I have a specific pillar where our BRG leaders have assigned to our talent acquisition space. We have one that's tagged to our engagement and employee retention space, which is more of our L&D and growth and development talent management. I have one pillar that's dedicated to business development, partnering with our businesses that are dealing with profit and otherwise. And then our community relations, having a lead group that works with them. And then fundamentally, our communications. We actually have a separate group designed that focuses on communications with the overall organization of HR as well as the company.
Wow. So you're kind of making sure you're tapping into all of the areas as possible and pulling all of the knowledge and experience and resources back in and keeping that I suppose that's the key thing in it, especially with a large organization like itself, is that constant flow of communication with the team, right? Because without that, you just keep playing a guessing game otherwise. Well, so what does the future for you look like in the area, in the space?
I would say even within the BRG space or employee resource group or whatever the acronyms different companies use, it is also one of those unpioneered areas that has not been solved. My goal is to continue to grow the strategy that I have with my team and make it a good standard that can be eventually rolled out for everyone else. I will say it's somewhat of a mixture of both new and old. There's a standard that's out there that I've seen that was a great initial foundation, and the newer strategy is focused on making sure that D&I does not come in, and especially our business resource groups, does not come in and stack on more things for our HR partners to do. It's very much about meeting them at the table and say, hey, how can I help you weave this into your existing strategy, look at things differently, and utilize our business resource groups or D&I for that matter to look at ways from a different angle, because it's all about lenses. What type of lens do you have on today?
Yeah.
So
before we wrap up, could you share, when you talk about the BRG groups, could you share some of the successes that have come out of doing that and what impact that had on the business?
Absolutely. So one of the first things I've realized when it comes to business resource groups is the potential of how they can impact actual numbers for that matter. And I mean profit. I remember one of my business resource groups are at Best Buy, and it was the Latin group. Latin,
the Latin group. I just love it. I want to be part of that group.
Exactly. It's so much fun too. They ended up giving insight to one of our marketing and branding team when it came to, for example, having Spanish translation on all the materials in the building, having separate branding for everything. At the end of the day, after the review and the process, it was not useful. Most people rather just wanted us to hire people that spoke the language versus having tons of paper all over the place, and ended up saving the company millions because it was just wasted resource when we could just have hired people that represent, because for that community, they care more about a person than a pamphlet.
Yeah. Again, seems so obvious. You see, that's what, and these things aren't, they're not, highly costly initiatives to put together, I'm assuming, as well, right? It's not like you're having to have a huge investment. I suppose it's the coordination of getting everyone together, and of course, and so there is an element to it that way. But the value you just explained off the back of something so simple is huge to the organization, and you just have to ask the right questions.
Exactly.
Just have to ask the right questions. Amazing. Well, look, that leads us quite nicely onto the quickfire round, where I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and you have no longer than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers. Are you ready?
I'll try.
What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a senior leader in the D&I space?
Fear of failure. Fear of not knowing, honestly.
Yeah, I can't blame you when it was such a new area. You got more understanding than most people. What's the best piece of business advice that you've ever received?
Learn about your business. Learn about the business acumen. You can't just be a D&I practitioner and expect to come in with an HR mindset, and that works. You have to understand your business.
Great. What's one book you'd recommend to our audience and why?
That would be the inclusion dividend is the one I would say. Mark Camplin and Mason Donovan wrote that book. It's a good start for people to set their foundation, but inclusion dividend.
Great. Could you share one internet resource that you use to keep up to date with current events and network?
I would say LinkedIn. I use it a little bit too much. Everyone posts everything on there, so it's actually useful for that.
It's true. As I said on my last episode, I'm gonna have to get LinkedIn just to sponsor that one segment of the show because everyone keeps saying LinkedIn on there. Oh, look, you've been a fantastic guest. I have two more questions for you. One is, what's one thing about your business that most excites you today?
That innovation piece, giving people the opportunity to innovate and be themselves in it.
Fantastic. Well, you've been an amazing guest, and I know our members will be a lot better off for it. If there's one piece of guidance that you can give to your peers out there, what would that be?
Be bold. Be bold and go ask questions and learn from everywhere you can.
Fantastic. Well, look, James, you've been an amazing guest. Thank you very much for taking the time out to join us. Guys, make sure you head over to hrdleaders.com. There you'll find all of the show notes on the episode, everything we've been talking about, and links to any of the resources that were mentioned. Thank you again for sharing your journey, and I wish you all the best until we next speak.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.